We are just seconds away from President Biden's first joint address to Congress. Any moment now, we expect the Sergeant-at-Arms to announce his arrival. The President will then walk into the chamber and up to the lectern to deliver his address.
Sorry to disappoint you this morning.
And that is just about where this speech will stop resembling any former joint address to Congress or State of the Union. We have never seen this sort of thing done during a pandemic before. There is no blueprint for this. They are doing their best on the advice of the Capitol physician. Instead of addressing a packed chamber of more than 1,500 people, the president will be speaking to just 200 lawmakers and government officials. We're seeing a number of members of Congress from both parties, senators and members of the House, arriving, including the leader of the Republicans there, Kevin McCarthy. Most of the president's cabinet not in attendance this evening. We just saw the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense arrive. They will be it for the cabinet. This will change the tenor and the mood of this address, but it makes the speech no less significant. The president making his first address to Congress tonight at what is widely viewed to be an inflection point for the country, as the president puts forth his plans for the nation.
Let's come down. Back up just a minute. Still got a few more here.
Senator Leahy there, Senate President Pro Tem. There had been some question as to whether Senator Leahy would attend tonight. He said would not sort of commit in advance to the fact that he was going to be there because of his key role in the presidential line of succession. Senator Debbie Stabenow of Michigan there, Senator Amy Klobuchar behind her, and of course the Democratic leader, Senator Chuck Schumer, exchanging elbow bumps with others. Senator Mitch McConnell greeting Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who's been at the heart of so much internal Republican consternation with her division of herself from her party in terms of their adherence to the legacy of Donald Trump.
Elliot Engel is upset.
Yes.
Wait all day.
Elliot Engel.
You wait all day and that's
It is also history, we should note, that we've got the second gentleman tonight looking on, along with First Lady Dr. Jill Biden. Joy, I can't believe that you didn't have anything to say at all about the First Lady's dress.
I held it in. I think it's very pretty. I don't know the designer, and you know I'm secretly texting people to find out.
You got very quiet.
Yeah.
As soon as she walked in.
I know her sartorial splendor will not go unremarked upon. I think she looks lovely. I love the flowers. I love the color. I think it's a good color.
Gabriella Hearst is the designer.
There you go. You see, you're into it too.
She's from Uruguay. No, I just tell people what they tell me to tell you. Because I don't understand what any of this means. I've been wearing the same thing for 13 years.
I'm buying you that dress for Christmas.
Unless it's a black blazer, it won't fit.
It ain't gonna work. But no, I think she looks lovely, and it's age appropriate, but it's showing a little bit of something. She's giving you a little bit of reveal, but not too much reveal. So I love it.
Did you notice how she was received? I mean, she really is the most sort of warmly, and no one is afraid of publicly embracing and cheering Dr. Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. You heard the room
Except the people who hate that she's called doctor, which is weird.
Yeah, I don't even know if there are any of them.
That was a
chamber.
swing and a miss from our friends across the street at Fox News. I think an effort to try to demonize her was...
She's undemonizable. She just like that. She just appears to be, just from looking at her, the nicest person in the world. And she's a teacher. Who doesn't love that?
Here's the president.
Another gavel.
Madam Speaker, the President of the United States.
for having me. Okay.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good to be back. As Mitch and Chuck will understand, it's good to be almost home. Down the hall. Anyway, thank you all. Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words. And it's about time. First Lady, I'm her husband. Second Gentleman, Chief Justice, members of the United States Congress and the Cabinet, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. While the setting tonight is familiar, this gathering is just a little bit different. A reminder of the extraordinary times we're in. Throughout our history, presidents have come to this chamber to speak to Congress, to the nation, and to the world, to declare war, to celebrate peace, to announce new plans and possibilities. Tonight, I come to talk about crisis and opportunity, about rebuilding the nation, revitalizing our democracy, and winning the future for America. I stand here tonight, one day shy of the 100th day of my administration. 100 days since I took the oath of office and lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation, we all did, that was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, after just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. Turning peril into possibility, crisis to opportunity, setbacks into strength. We all know life can knock us down, but in America, we never, ever, ever stay down. Americans always get up. Today, that's what we're doing. America's rising anew, choosing hope over fear, truth over lies, and light over darkness. After 100 days of rescue and renewal, America is ready for a takeoff, in my view. We're working again, dreaming again, discovering again, and leading the world again. We have shown each other and the world that there's no quit in America, none. 100 days ago, America's house was on fire. We had to act. And thanks to the extraordinary leadership of Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, and the overwhelming support of the American people, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, we did act. Together, we passed the American Rescue Plan, one of the most consequential rescue packages in American history. We're already seeing the results. We're already seeing the results. After I promised we'd get 100 million COVID-19 vaccine shots into people's arms in 100 days, We will have provided over 220 million COVID shots in those 100 days. Thanks to all the help of all of you. We're marshaling, with your help, everyone's help, we're marshaling every federal resource. We've gotten vaccines to nearly 40,000 pharmacies and over 700 community health centers where the poorest of the poor can be reached. We're setting up community vaccination sites, developing mobile units to get to hard-to-reach communities. Today, 90% of Americans now live within 5 miles of a vaccination site. Everyone over the age of 16, everyone is now eligible to get vaccinated right now, right away. Go get vaccinated, America. Go and get the vaccination. They're available. You're eligible now. When I was sworn in on January 20th, less than 1% of the seniors in America were fully vaccinated against COVID-19. 100 days later, 70% of seniors in America over 65 are protected, fully protected. Senior deaths from COVID-19 are down 80% since January. Down 80% because of all of you. And more than half of all the adults in America have gotten at least one shot. A mass vaccination center in Glendale, Arizona, I asked the nurse, I said, "What's it like?" She looked at me and she said, "It's like every shot is giving a dose of hope," is her phrase, a dose of hope. A dose of hope for an educator in Florida who has a child suffering from an autoimmune disease. Wrote to me, said she's worried, and she was worried about bringing the virus home. She said she then got vaccinated at a large site in her car. She said she sat in her car when she got vaccinated and just cried. Cried out of joy and cried out of relief. Parents, seeing the smiles on their kids' faces for those who are able to go back to school because the teachers and school bus drivers and cafeteria workers have been vaccinated. Grandparents, hugging their children and grandchildren instead of pressing hands against a window to say goodbye. It means everything. Those things mean everything. You know, there's still, you all know it, you know it better than any group of Americans, there's still more work to do to beat this virus. We can't let our guard down. But tonight, I can say, because of you, the American people, our progress these past 100 days against one of the worst pandemics in history has been one of the greatest logistical achievements this country's ever seen. What else have we done in those first 100 days? We kept our commitment, Democrats and Republicans, of sending $1,400 rescue checks to 85% of American households. We've already sent more than 160 million checks out the door. It's making a difference. You all know it when you go home. For many people, it's making all the difference in the world. A single mom in Texas who wrote me, she said she couldn't work. But she said the relief check put food on the table and saved her and her son from eviction from their apartment. A grandmother in Virginia who told me she immediately took her granddaughter to the eye doctor, something she said she put off for months because she didn't have the money. One of the defining images, at least from my perspective in this crisis, has been cars lined up for miles. And not people just barely able to start those cars, nice cars, lined up for miles, waiting for a box of food to be put in their trunk. I don't know about you, but I didn't ever think I'd see that in America. And all of this is through no fault of their own. No fault of their own, these people are in this position. That's why the rescue plan is delivering food and nutrition assistance to millions of Americans facing hunger. And hunger is down sharply already. We're also providing rental assistance. You all know this, but the American people, I want to make sure they understand. Keeping people from being evicted from their homes. Providing loans to small businesses that reopen and keep their employees on the job. During these 100 days, an additional 800,000 Americans enrolled in the Affordable Care Act when I established a special sign-up period to do that. 800,000 in that period. We're making one of the largest one-time ever investments, ever, in improving health care for veterans. Critical investments to address the opioid crisis. And maybe most importantly, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, we're on track to cut child poverty in America in half this year. And in the process, while this was all going on, the economy created more than 1,300,000 new jobs in 100 days. More jobs in the first 100 days than any president on record. The International Monetary Fund is now estimating our economy will grow at a rate of more than 6% this year. That will be the fastest pace of economic growth in this country in nearly 4 decades. America's moving forward, but we can't stop now. We're in competition with China and other countries to win the 21st century. We're at a great inflection point in history. We have to do more than just build back better. We have to build back better. We have to compete more strenuously than we have. Throughout our history, if you think about it, public investment in infrastructure has literally transformed America. Our attitudes as well as our opportunities. The Transcontinental Railroad, the interstate highways, united 2 oceans and brought a totally new age of progress to the United States of America. Universal public schools and college aid opened wide the doors of opportunity. Scientific breakthroughs took us to the moon. Now we're on Mars, discovering vaccines, gave us the internet, and so much more. These are investments we made together as one country, and investments that only the government was in a position to make. Time and again, they propel us into the future. That's why I proposed the American Jobs Plan, a once-in-a-generation investment in America itself. This is the largest jobs plan since World War II. It creates jobs to upgrade our transportation infrastructure. Jobs modernizing our roads, bridges, highways. Jobs building ports and airports, rail corridors, transit lines. It's clean water. And today, up to 10 million homes in America and more than 400,000 schools and child care centers have pipes with lead in them, including drinking water. A clear and present danger to our children's health. American Jobs Plan creates jobs replacing 100% of the nation's lead pipes and service lines, so every American can drink clean water. And in the process, it will create thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs. It creates jobs connecting every American with high-speed internet, including 35% of the rural America that still doesn't have it. It's going to help our kids and our businesses succeed in the 21st century economy. And I'm asking the Vice President to lead this effort, if she would, because I know it will get done. Creates jobs building a modern power grid, Our grids are vulnerable to storms, hacks, catastrophic failures with tragic results, as we saw in Texas and elsewhere during the winter storms. The American Jobs Plan will create jobs that lay thousands of miles of transmission lines needed to build a resilient and fully clean grid. We can do that. Look, the American Jobs Plan will help millions of people get back to their jobs and back to their careers. 2 million women have dropped out of the workforce during this pandemic. 2 million. And too often because they couldn't get the care they needed to care for their child or care for an elderly parent who needs help. 800,000 families are on the Medicare waiting list right now to get home care for their aging parent or loved one with disability. If you think it's not important, check out in your own district, Democrat or Republican. Democrat or Republican voters. Their great concern, almost as much as their children, is taking care of an elderly loved one who can't be left alone. Medicaid contemplated it, but this plan is going to help those families and create jobs for our caregivers with better wages and better benefits, continuing a cycle of growth. For too long, we've failed to use the most important word when it comes to meeting the climate crisis: jobs. 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 For me, when I think climate change, I think jobs. American Jobs Plan will put engineers and construction workers to work building more energy-efficient buildings and homes. Electrical workers, IBEW members installing 500,000 charging stations along our highways so we can own the electric car market. Farmers planting cover crops so they can reduce the carbon dioxide in the air and get paid for doing it. Look, think about it. There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. No reason. None. No reason. So, folks, there's no reason why American workers can't lead the world in the production of electric vehicles and batteries. I mean, there is no reason. We have the capacity. We're the brightest, best trained people in the world. The American Jobs Plan is going to create millions of good-paying jobs, jobs Americans can raise a family on. As my dad would then say, with a little breathing room. And all the investments in the American Job Plan will be guided by one principle: buy American. Buy American. And I might note parenthetically, that does not violate any trade agreement. It's been the law since the 30s. Buy American. American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America to create American jobs. That's the way it's supposed to be, and it will be in this administration. And I made it clear to all my cabinet people, their ability to give exemptions has been strenuously limited. It will be American products. Now, I know some of you at home are wondering whether these jobs are for you. So many of you, so many of the folks I grew up with, feel left behind, forgotten, in an economy that's so rapidly changing. It's frightening. I want to speak directly to you, because you think about it. That's what people are most worried about. Can I fit in? Independent experts estimate the American Jobs Plan will add millions of jobs and trillions of dollars to economic growth in the years to come. It is an 8-year program. These are good-paying jobs that can't be outsourced. Nearly 90% of the infrastructure jobs created in the American Jobs Plan do not require a college degree. 75% don't require an associate's degree. The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. That's what it is. And it recognizes something I've always said in this chamber and the other. Good guys and women on Wall Street, but Wall Street didn't build this country. The middle class built the country, and unions built the middle class. So that's why I'm calling on Congress to pass Protect the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, and send it to my desk so we can support the right to unionize. And by the way, while you're thinking about sending things to my desk, let's raise the minimum wage to $15. No one working 40 hours a week, no one working 40 hours a week should live below the poverty line. We need to ensure greater equity and opportunity for women. And while we're doing this, let's get the Paycheck Fairness Act to my desk as well, equal pay. It's been much too long. And if you wonder whether it's too long, look behind me. And finally, American Jobs Plan will be the biggest increase in non-defense research and development on record. We'll see more technological change, and some of you know more about this than I do. We'll see more technological change in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 50. That's how rapidly artificial intelligence and so much more is changing. And we're falling behind the competition with the rest of the world. Decades ago, we used to invest 2% of our gross domestic product in America, 2% of our gross domestic product in research and development. Today, Mr. Secretary, that's less than 1%. China and other countries are closing in fast. We have to develop and dominate the products and technologies of the future. Advanced batteries, biotechnology, computer chips, clean energy. The Secretary of Defense can tell you, and those of you who work in national security issues know, the Defense Department has an agency called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. The people who set up before I came here, and that's been a long time ago, to develop breakthroughs that enhance our national security. That's their only job. And it's a semi-separate agency. It's under the Defense Department. It's led to everything from the discovery of the internet to GPS and so much more that's enhanced our security. The National Institute of Health, the NIH, I believe, should create a similar advanced research projects agency for health. And here's what it would do. It would have a singular purpose: to develop breakthroughs to prevent, detect, and treat diseases like Alzheimer's, diabetes, and cancer. I'll still never forget when we passed the cancer proposal in the last year I was vice president. Almost $9 million going to NIH. And they've excused the point of personal privilege. I'll never forget you standing, Mitch, and saying, "Name it after my deceased son." It meant a lot. But so many of us have deceased sons, daughters, and relatives who died of cancer. I can think of no more worthy investment. I know of nothing that is more bipartisan So let's end cancer as we know it. It's within our power. It's within our power to do it. Investments in jobs and infrastructure like the ones we're talking about have often had bipartisan support in the past. Vice President Harris and I met regularly in the Oval Office with Democrats and Republicans and discussed the jobs plan. And I applaud a group of Republican senators who just put forward their own proposal. So let's get to work. I wanted to lay out before the Congress my plan before we got into the deep discussions. I'd like to meet with those who have ideas that are different, they think are better. I welcome those ideas. But the rest of the world is not waiting for us. I just want to be clear. From my perspective, doing nothing is not an option. Look, we can't be so busy competing with one another that we forget the competition that we have with the rest of the world to win the 21st century. Secretary Blinken can tell you I spent a lot of time with President Xi. Traveled over 17,000 miles with him. Spent, they tell me, over 24 hours in private discussions with him. When he called to congratulate him, we had a 2-hour discussion. He's deadly earnest about becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world. He and others, autocrats, think that democracy can't compete in the 21st century with autocracies. It takes too long to get consensus. To win that competition for the future, in my view, we also need to make a once-in-a-generation investment in our families and our children. That's why I've introduced the American Families Plan tonight, which addresses 4 of the biggest challenges facing American families and in turn America. First is access to good education. When this nation made 12 years of public education universal in the last century, it made us the best educated, best prepared nation in the world. It's, I believe, the overwhelming reason that propelled us to where we got in the 20th century. But the world's caught up or catching up. They're not waiting. I would say parenthetically, if we were sitting down, we set a bipartisan committee together and said, okay, we're going to decide what we do in terms of government providing for free education. I wonder whether we'd think, as we did in the 20th century, that 12 years is enough in the 21st century. I doubt it. 12 years is no longer enough today to compete with the rest of the world in the 21st century. That's why my American Families Plan guarantees 4 additional years of public education for every person in America, starting as early as we can. The great universities in this country have conducted studies of the last 10 years. It shows that adding 2 years of universal high-quality preschool for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old, no matter what background they come from, puts them in a position to be able to compete all the way through 12 years and increases exponentially their prospect of graduating and going on beyond graduation. Research shows when a young child goes to school, not daycare, they're far more likely to graduate from high school and go to college or something after high school. When you add 2 years of free community college on top of that, you begin to change the dynamic. We can do that. And we'll increase Pell Grants and invest in historical black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, minority-serving institutions. The reason is they don't have the endowments. But their students are just as capable of learning about cybersecurity, just as capable of learning about metallurgy, all the things that are going on that provide those jobs of the future. Jill is a community college professor who teaches today as First Lady. She's long said, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Joe, any country that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. She'll be deeply involved in leading this effort. Thank you, Jill. Second thing we need, American Families Plan will provide access to quality, affordable child care. We guarantee what I'm proposing in legislation, we guarantee that low and middle income families will pay no more than 7% of their income for high-quality care for children up to the age of 5. The most hard-pressed working families won't have to spend a dime. Third, the American Families Plan will finally provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave and medical leave, family medical leave. We're one of the few industrial countries in the world. No one should have to choose between a job and a paycheck, or taking care of themselves and their loved ones, or parent, or spouse, or child. And fourth, the American Family Plan puts directly into the pockets of millions of Americans. In March, we expanded tax credit for every child in a family, up to $3,000 per child if you're under 6 years of age. Over 6 years of age. And $3,600 for children over 6 years of age. With 2 parents, 2 kids, that's $7,200 in the pockets that are going to help take care of your family. And that will help more than 65 million children and help cut child care poverty in half. And we can afford it. So we did that in the last piece of legislation we passed. But let's extend that child care tax credit at least through the end of 2025. The American Rescue Plan lowered health care premiums for 9 million Americans who buy their coverage under the Affordable Care Act. I know that's really popular this side of the aisle. But let's make that provision permanent so their premiums don't go back up. In addition to my family's plan, I'm going to work with Congress to address this year other critical priorities for American families. The Affordable Care Act has been a lifeline for millions of Americans, protecting people with pre-existing conditions, protecting women's health, and the pandemic has demonstrated how badly it's needed. Let's lower deductibles for working families on the Affordable Care Act. And let's lower prescription drug costs. We know how to do this. The last president had that as an objective. We all know how outrageously expensive drugs are in America. In fact, we pay the highest prescription drug prices of anywhere in the world, right here in America. Nearly 3 times for the same drug, nearly 3 times what other countries pay. We have to change that, and we can. Let's do what we talked about for all the years I was down here in this body, in Congress. Let's give Medicare the power to save hundreds of billions of dollars by negotiating lower drug prescription prices. And by the way, it won't just help people on Medicare. lower prescription drug costs for everyone. And the money we save, which is billions of dollars, can go to strengthen the Affordable Care Act and expand Medicare coverage benefits without costing taxpayers an additional penny. It's within our power to do it. Let's do it now. We've talked about it long enough, Democrats and Republicans. Let's get it done this year. This is all about a simple premise. Health care should be a right, not a privilege in America. So, how do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I made it clear we can do it without increasing the deficits. Let's start with what I will not do. I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share. Sometimes I have arguments with my friends in the Democratic Party. I think you should be able to become a billionaire and a millionaire, but pay your fair share. A recent study shows that 55 of the nation's biggest corporations paid zero federal tax last year. Those 55 corporations made in excess of $40 billion in profit. A lot of companies also evade taxes through tax havens in Switzerland and Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. And they benefit from tax loopholes and deductions for offshoring jobs and shifting profits overseas. It's not right. We're going to reform corporate taxes so they pay their fair share and help pay for the public investments their businesses will benefit from as well. We're going to reward work, not just wealth. We take the top tax bracket for the wealthiest 1% of Americans, those making over $400,000 or more, back up to where it was when George W. Bush was president, when he started, 39.6%. That's where it was when George W. was president. We're going to get rid of the loopholes, allow Americans to make more than $1 million a year and pay a lower tax rate on their capital gains than Americans who receive a paycheck. We're only going to affect 0.3% of all Americans by that action, 0.3%. And the IRS is going to crack down on millionaires and billionaires who cheat on their taxes. It's estimated to be billions of dollars by think tanks that are left, right, and center. I'm not looking to punish anybody, but I will not add a tax burden, additional tax burden to the middle class in this country. They're already paying enough. I believe what I propose is fair, fiscally responsible, and it raises revenue to pay for the plans I propose and will create millions of jobs that will grow the economy and enhance our financial standing in the country. When you hear someone say they don't want to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% or corporate America, ask them, whose taxes you want to raise? Instead, who's they going to cut? Look, the big tax cut of 2017. Remember, it was supposed to pay for itself. That was how it was sold. And generate vast economic growth. Instead, it added $2 trillion to the deficit. It was a huge windfall for corporate America and those at the very top. Instead of using the tax saving to raise wages and invest in research and development, it poured billions of dollars into the pockets of CEOs. In fact, the pay gap between CEOs and their workers is now among the largest in history. According to one study, CEOs make 320 times what the average worker in their corporation makes. It used to be below 100. The pandemic has only made things worse. 20 million Americans lost their job in the pandemic, working and middle-class Americans. At the same time, roughly 650 billionaires in America saw their net worth increase by more than $1 trillion in the same exact period. Let me say it again. 650 people increased their wealth by more than $1 trillion during this pandemic. And they're now worth more than $4 trillion. My fellow Americans, trickle down. Trickle down economics has never worked. And it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out. You know, there's a broad consensus of economists left, right, and center, and they agree what I'm proposing will help create millions of jobs and generate historic economic growth. These are among the highest values investments we can make as a nation. I've often said our greatest strength is the power of our example, not just the example of our power. In my conversations with world leaders, and I've spoken to over 38, 40 of them now, I've made it known that America's back. And you know what they say? The comment I hear most of all from them is they say, we see America's back, but for how long? But for how long? My fellow Americans, we have to show not just that we're back, but that we're back to stay, and that we aren't going to go it alone. We're going to do it by leading with our allies. No one nation can deal with all the crises of our time, from terrorism to nuclear proliferation, mass migration, cybersecurity, climate change, as well as what we're experiencing now, the pandemics. There's no wall high enough to keep any virus out. And our own vaccine supply, as it grows to meet our needs, and we're meeting them, will become an arsenal for vaccines for other countries, just as America is an arsenal for democracy for the world, and in consequence, influence the world. But every American will have access before that occurs. Every American will have access to be fully covered by COVID-19 from the vaccines we have. Look, the climate crisis is not our fight alone, it's a global fight. The United States accounts, as all of you know, less than 15% of carbon emissions. The rest of the world accounts for 85%. That's why I kept my commitment to rejoin the Paris Accord, because if we do everything perfectly, it's not going to only matter. I kept my commitment to convene a climate summit right here in America with all the major economies of the world: China, Russia, India, European Union. And I said I'd do it in my first 100 days. I want to be very blunt about it. My attempt was to make sure that the world could see there was a consensus, that we are at an inflection point in history. The consensus is if we act to save the planet, we can create millions of jobs and economic growth and opportunity to raise the standard of living of almost everyone around the world. If you watched any of it and you were all busy, I'm sure you didn't have much time. That's what virtually every nation said, even the ones that aren't doing their fair share. The investments I propose tonight also advance the foreign policy, in my view, that benefits the middle class. That means making sure every nation plays by the same rules in the global economy, including China. In my discussion with President Xi, I told him, we welcome the competition. We're not looking for conflict. But I made absolutely clear that we will defend America's interest across the board. America will stand up to unfair trade practices that undercut American workers and American industries, like subsidies from state to state-owned operations and enterprises, and the theft of American technology and intellectual property. I also told President Xi that we'll maintain a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, just as we do with NATO in Europe. Not to start a conflict, but to prevent one. I told them what I've said to many world leaders, that America will not back away from our commitments, our commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to our alliances. And I pointed out to him, no responsible American president could remain silent when basic human rights are being so blatantly violated. An American president has to represent the essence of what our country stands for. America is an idea, the most unique idea in history. We are created, all of us, equal. It's who we are. And we cannot walk away from that principle and, in fact, say we're dealing with the American idea. With regard to Russia, I know it concerns some of you, but I made very clear to Putin that we're not going to seek escalation, but their actions will have consequences. They turn out to be true, and they turned out to be true. So I responded directly and proportionately to Russia's interference in our elections and the cyber attacks on our government and our business. They did both of these things, and I told them we would respond, and we have. But we can also cooperate when it's our mutual interest. We did it when we extended the New START Treaty on nuclear arms, and we're working to do it on climate change. But he understands we will respond. On Iran and North Korea, nuclear programs that present serious threats to American security and the security of the world. We're going to be working closely with our allies to address the threats posed by both of these countries through diplomacy as well as stern deterrence. And American leadership means ending the forever war in Afghanistan. We have without hyperbole, the greatest fighting force in the history of the world. I'm the first president in 40 years who knows what it means to have a son serving in a war zone. Today, we have service members serving in the same war zone as their parents did. We have service members in Afghanistan who are not yet born on 9/11. The war in Afghanistan, as we remember the debates here, were never meant to be multi-generational undertakings of nation building. We went to Afghanistan to get the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. And we said we would follow Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell to do it. If you've been in the upper Konar Valley, you've kind of seen the gates of hell. And we delivered justice to bin Laden. We degraded the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And after 20 years of valor, and sacrifice, it's time to bring those troops home. Look, even as we do, we'll maintain over-the-horizon capacity to suppress future threats to the homeland. Make no mistake, in 20 years, terrorism has metastasized. The threat has evolved way beyond Afghanistan. Those of you in the intelligence committees, the foreign relations committee, defense committees, you know well, we have to remain vigilant against the threats to the United States wherever they come from. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are in Yemen, Syria, Somalia, other places in Africa, in the Middle East, and beyond. And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. We're not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal the soul of this nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her. so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. The vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they want... I know they want to help meet this moment as well. My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. The country supports this reform, and Congress should act. We have a giant opportunity to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice, real justice. And with the plans outlined tonight, we have a real chance to root out systemic racism that plagues America and American lives in other ways. A chance to deliver real equity, good jobs, good schools, affordable housing, clean air, clean water, being able to generate wealth and pass it down through generations because you have access to purchase a house. Real opportunities in the lives of more Americans, Black, white, Latino, Asian Americans, Native Americans. Look, I also want to thank the United States Senate for voting 94-1 to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to protect Asian American and Pacific Islanders. You acted decisively. You can see on television the viciousness of the hate crimes we've seen over the past year and for too long. I urge the House to do the same and send that legislation to my desk, which I will gladly, anxiously sign. I also hope Congress will get to my desk the Equality Act to protect LGBTQ Americans. For all transgender Americans watching at home, especially young people, you're so brave. I want you to know your president has your back. Another thing, let's authorize the Violence Against Women Act, which has been law for 27 years. "27 years ago, I wrote it. It'll close the act that has to be authorized now, will close the boyfriend loophole to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. The court order said this is an abuser. You can't own a gun. It's to close that loophole that existed. You know, it's estimated that 50 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner every month in America. 50 a month. Let's pass it and save some lives. And I need not tell anyone this, but gun violence has become an epidemic in America. The flag at the White House was still flying at half-mast for the 8 victims of the mass shooting in Georgia, when 10 more lives were taken in a mass shooting in Colorado. And in the week in between those two events, 250 other Americans were shot dead in the streets of America. 250 shot dead. I know how hard it is to make progress on this issue. In the 90s, we passed universal background checks. a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines that hold 100 rounds that can be fired off in seconds. We beat the NRA. Mass shootings and gun violence declined. Check out the report over 10 years. But in the early 2000s, the law expired. We've seen daily bloodshed since. I'm not saying if the law continued, we wouldn't see bloodshed. More than 2 weeks ago in the Rose Garden, surrounded by some of the bravest people I know, the survivors and families who lost loved ones to gun violence, I laid out several of the Department of Justice actions that are being taken to impact this epidemic. One of them is banning so-called ghost guns. These are homemade guns built from a kit that includes directions how to finish the firearm. The parts have no serial numbers, so they show up at crime scenes and they can't be traced. The buyers of these ghost gun kits aren't required to pass any background check. Anyone, from a criminal or terrorist, could buy this kit and within 30 minutes have a weapon that's lethal, but no more. And I'll do everything in my power to protect the American people from this epidemic of gun violence, but it's time for Congress to act as well. Look, I don't want to become confrontational, but we need more Senate Republicans to join the overwhelming majority of Democratic colleagues and close the loopholes required in background check purchases of guns. We need a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And don't tell me it can't be done. We did it before and it worked. Talk to most responsible gun owners and hunters. They'll tell you there's no possible justification for having 100 rounds in a weapon. What do you think, deer wearing Kevlar vests? They'll tell you that there are too many people today who are able to buy a gun but shouldn't be able to buy a gun. These kinds of reasonable reforms have overwhelming support from the American people, including many gun owners. The country supports reform and Congress should act. This shouldn't be a red or blue issue. And no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. From the very beginning, there were certain guns, weapons, that could not be owned by Americans. Certain people could not own those weapons ever. We're not changing the Constitution. We're being reasonable. I think this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. I think it's an American issue. And here's what else we can do. Immigration has always been essential to America. Let's end our exhausting war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it. On day one of my presidency, I kept my commitment and sent a comprehensive immigration bill to the United States Congress. If you believe we need to secure the border, pass it because it has a lot of money for high-tech border security. If you believe in a pathway to citizenship, pass it. It's over 11 million undocumented folks, the vast majority of here overstaying visas. Pass it. We can actually, if you actually want to solve a problem, I've sent a bill to take a close look at it. We also have to get at the root problem of why people are fleeing, particularly to our southern border from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The violence, the corruption, the gangs, the political instability, hunger, hurricanes, earthquakes, natural disasters. When I was president, when I was vice president, the president asked me to focus on providing help needed to address the root causes of migration. And it helped keep people in their own countries instead of being forced to leave. The plan was working, but the last administration decided it was not worth it. I'm restoring the program and asked Vice President Harris to lead our diplomatic effort to take care of this. I have absolute confidence she'll get the job done. Now look, if you don't like my plan, let's at least pass what we all agree on. Congress needs to pass legislation this year to finally secure protection for dreamers, the young people who've only known America as their home. And permanent protection for immigrants who are here on temporary protective status who came from countries beset by man-made and natural-made violence and disaster, as well as a pathway to citizenship for farm workers who put food on our tables. Look, immigrants have done so much for America during this pandemic and throughout our history. The country supports immigration reform. We should act. Let's argue over it. Let's debate it. But let's act. And if we truly want to restore the soul of America, we need to protect the sacred right to vote. Most people more people voted in the last presidential election than any time in American history, in the middle of the worst pandemic ever. It should be celebrated. Instead, it's being attacked. Congress should pass H.R. 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and send it to my desk right away. The country supports it, and Congress should act now. Look, in conclusion, as we gather here tonight, the image of a violent mob assaulting this Capitol, desecrating our democracy, remain vivid in all our minds. Lives were put at risk, many of your lives. Lives were lost. Extraordinary courage was summoned. The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive, and it did. But the struggle is far from over. The question of whether our democracy will long endure is both ancient and urgent. As old as our republic, still vital today. Can our democracy deliver on its promise that all of us, created equal in the image of God, had a chance to lead lives of dignity, respect, and possibility? Can our democracy deliver to the most pressing needs of our people? Can our democracy overcome the lies, anger, hate, and fears that have pulled us apart? America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting we can't. And I promise you they're betting we can't. They believe we're too full of anger and division and rage. They look at the images of the mob that assaulted the Capitol as proof that the sun is setting on American democracy. But they're wrong. You know it, I know it. But we have to prove them wrong. We have to prove democracy still works, that our government still works, and we can deliver for our people. In our first 100 days together, we've acted to restore people's faith in democracy to deliver. We're vaccinating the nation. We're creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We're delivering real results to people. They can see it, feel it in their own lives. Opening doors of opportunity, guaranteeing some more fairness and justice. That's the essence of America. That's democracy in action. Our Constitution opens with the words, as trite as it sounds, we the people. Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government. You and I. Not some force in a distant capital. Not some powerful force that we have no control over. It's us. It's we the people. In another era, when our democracy was tested, Franklin Roosevelt reminded us, in America, we do our part. We all do our part. That's all I'm asking. That we do our part, all of us. If we do that, we will meet the center challenge of the age by proving that democracy is durable and strong. Autocrats will not win the future. We will. America will. And the future belongs to America. As I stand here tonight before you in a new and vital hour of life and democracy of our nation, and I can say with absolute confidence, I have never been more confident or optimistic about America. Not because I'm president, because of what's happening with the American people. We've stared into the abyss of insurrection and autocracy, pandemic and pain, and we, the people, did not flinch. At the very moment our adversaries were certain we'd pull apart and fail, we came together, we united. With light and hope, we summoned a new strength, new resolve to position us to win the competition of the 21st century. On our way to a union more perfect, more prosperous, and more just, as one people, one nation, and one America. Folks, as I told every world leader I've ever met with over the years, it's never, ever, ever been a good bet to bet against America, and it still isn't. We're the United States of America. There's not a single thing, nothing beyond our capacity. We can do whatever we set our minds to if we do it together. So let's begin to get together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience. Thank you. Thank you.
He started by thanking the Speaker of the House for having him. He finished by thanking all those watching for their patience. No one yelled, "You lie." The Speaker didn't rip up the speech on live television, so by the standards of about the last 20 years, it was a successful evening where these speeches are concerned. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, followed by one-time rival Bernie Sanders. Our mics are open. We're going to pause and try to catch some of this. As he talks with Congresswoman Waters, Senator Reid.
Bobby, how you doing? How's Mom? Give her my love. Watch out for that. I'll be nice to you. Stanton.
The veteran Democrat Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut, having something of an intense fist bump moment with the president. It's by now a cliche, but this is truly where Joe Biden is the most at home. In this, and especially the neighboring Senate chamber, among pals, among elected officials. 36 years is a tough habit to break, and then that was followed by 8 years presiding over the Senate as vice president, meeting the new sergeant at arms. After 4 years of a monotone shout, it was bracing to hear a speech delivered at times by a whisper. His use of voice modulation was rather extraordinary given the television era, and it served as cover at times for unspooling an ambition in this speech that was Rooseveltian in size and scope. He treated the sparse crowd with a kind of intimacy in the chamber that may very well have translated to the television audience at home. At his best, he reminded America what Americans are capable of, something presidents do, something presidents say. In the midst of what is, by any standard, a huge vaccine victory, he couldn't resist saying there's no wall high enough to keep out the pandemic. But his last line, now that we've lost the ability to hear him in the crowd, we are the United States of America. There is nothing beyond our capacity, nothing we can't do if we do it together. That's an easy one. It's always been true. We just haven't heard it in a while, and right now, a good many folks need to hear it. Pat Leahy, senior serving member of the U.S. Senate, Democratic side. Rachel, over to you and our friends.
Brian, thank you. It's telling and I think Interesting in its own right that the president made tracks when he came into the chamber. That is often something in normal times that takes a very long time for the president to make it down that aisle, with members of Congress crowding the aisle, wanting to be seen with the president. There have been times when the president at that moment signs things or otherwise poses with members on their way in. In this case, walking in, that was not what President Biden wanted to do. But now that it is done, and the opportunity is there for him to, as we've seen in these last few minutes, ask, how's your mom? Tell her I said hi. Talk to individual members of the United States Senate, even the House, showing that he knows them. Rosa, when he'd had that moment with Rosa DeLauro, I had to think that that moment is about the child tax credit, which has been her life's work as a longstanding member of Congress from Connecticut to get that child tax credit in place, which will have a massive effect on the family finances of working families all over the country. If you have kids, you're going to start getting checks from the government this summer, every month, as a tax credit for having kids in this country. Rosa DeLauro made that happen. The president tonight promised that he will do his best to get that made extended so that it's not just part of the temporary COVID relief bill, but that it lasts, as he said tonight, until 2025. There was some news tonight, the president, I think, appearing to tell, it was a little unclear, but I think he was saying that Vice President Harris will be helming the effort to establish high-speed broadband nationwide. He talked about an ARPA, Advanced Research Project for Health, which would be an extension of the sort of cancer moonshot that he helmed during the Obama administration. See the president there with Republican Senator. That's Rob Porter.
Rob Portman, who has resigned. I mean, who is not running for re-election. Yeah. Tim Ryan announced to run for his seat.
There will be lines that stand out from this speech, both for history and for their impact. When he said, and we should note, the speech was about 50-50 ad lib and prepared remarks, but when he said, go get vaccinated, America, go and get the vaccination, they are available, you are eligible now, and the room erupted from that. Hard to make it more clear than that when he said white supremacy is terrorism. It's not exactly the way that it was written in his prepared remarks. He ad-libbed to add to those remarks, making that incredibly powerful statement. When he said to all the transgender Americans watching at home, especially the young people who are so brave, I want you to know that your president has your back. That will land like a proverbial bomb in LGBTQ communities across America. It's huge to have the president not just sort of name check you, but put it in those terms, in that sort of, in those sort of personal guarantee of terms. I think that'll be a very powerful moment for all the scope and all of the policy that he talked tonight. That one's going to stick.
You know, and I think you're pulling the thread that was so brilliantly woven through this speech. I mean, the speech was crafted, obviously, by him and his staff. And every ad-lib line was him and there's one ad-lib line I wrote down. He said, I don't want to get confrontational with you. It was around gun control. Mm-hmm. His connections to the people in this room, I'm not even sure if all of them are deserving of them, but he does not care. He gives to them the benefit of the doubt, the benefit of his goodwill. I thought it would be a hard speech to make optimistic. He did, and I, you know, with my black Sharpie, I think I wrote all the way through to the table this whole section about the insurrection. And, yeah. And you know, I think that to come out of a section about our enemies, the autocrats who wish to see our democratic experiment fail, will not win. When you come out of that darkness of what happened in that chamber was so remarkable. I have to say one other thing. I was thinking of the two people who have shaped him so much who weren't in the room. His son, Beau Biden, that was another ad-lib line when he was talking about the commitment to cancer research, and his friend John McCain, who made one of the bookends to this speech when he talked about ideologies that would end up in the ash heap of history. I think he's trying to put America's dark days behind us in that same ash heap of history.
Yeah. America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting that our democracy cannot deliver. They believe we're too full of anger and division and rage. They look at the images of the mob that assaulted this Capitol as proof that the sun is setting on American democracy. They are wrong. And we have to prove them wrong. We have to prove democracy still works.
Yeah, I mean, the part where he said, you know, I spent a lot of time with President Xi, and these autocrats are convinced that democracies, by definition, can't accomplish things because there's too much division. I have to go to one line that wasn't ad-libbed. This was at the end when he did say, our Constitution opens with "we the people," and it's time that we remember that the people and the government are us, which I think is an important, it was, you know, in this sort of place that had to be evacuated because of an insurrection, I feel like government came back and occupied it. And Biden occupied it with a kind of politics that is bread and butter, real working class politics. This was working class Joe. And he was just asking the question, are we still capable of doing big things together? Like, are we so broken as a society that we can't do big things like Eisenhower did with the, you know, traversing the country with the railroads, et cetera? It was an optimistic speech because it was about things the government can deliver to you that are specific, that you can feel, that you can see, that are visceral, whether it's emotional, as you said, with trans kids feeling like the government, it isn't against them, or whether it's African Americans hearing the president say, no, I get it. I understand that the real terrorism is this white nationalism that threatens your vote and threatens your ability to be full citizens, or just saying, look, we can build stuff.
Yeah.
We can still do that. And I thought it was, he does a kind of nostalgia. Trump did a different kind of nostalgia that was dark. His kind of nostalgia is saying, we're still capable of doing big things and that we can be bigger than this messiness. You know, and I think it was important for people to hear that. I feel like this speech with working class, and it's not just working class white voters, the Democrats have issues with working class black and brown voters too. Because they're saying, am I going to be able to compete if I don't have a college degree? Am I going to be able to get a decent job anymore? Am I going to be competing with workers in low-wage countries? And are my jobs going to get exported? That actually kind of dings with black and brown voters, too.
Sure.
So working class in general, he's saying, yeah, we are going to take care of you. We're going
When
to
he
make sure
says,
you get a job.
if you, they're talking about millions of jobs and millions of jobs. He says, if you are hearing this right now and you are wondering whether that is about you, let me talk to you at home and let you know that the vast majority of these jobs, you do not need your college degree.
That's
you
right.
do not need even an associate's degree. This is about the working class. This is about the middle class. And this is about good, well-paying jobs, building stuff that's going to make America a better place and help us compete competitively. And that's you know, it's an economic populism that I think a lot of Democrats have been wanting to hear from the top levels of the party for quite some time. But to pair that with what you're talking about, Nicole, in terms of that darkness and light, we have stared into an abyss of insurrection and autocracy, of pandemic and pain, and we the people did not flinch. At the very moment our adversaries were certain we would pull apart and fail, we came together. And it's the high and the low. It's him talking about where we've been pretty unflinchingly.
Well, and it's him taking really the inverse view of the country as the previous guy. He saw
American carnage?
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, that president's first speech to the country was American carnage, delivered obviously at his inauguration, but at the beginning. I thought that it would be a challenge to balance the clarity, the clear-eyed nature of what this threat was with this forward-looking view, but every page, and we have the pages, but you know, every couple minutes it's just littered with extensions and generosities to Republicans. If you don't pass my bill, send me something. He gave a shout out to the Republican, very pared down, sort of roads and bridges approach to infrastructure that we talked
Let's
about.
get to work, he said.
With Secretary Pete. You know, that's fine. That's a start. Like, he is willing to cast in good faith anything from the Republicans, and it brings into sharp relief what they're doing. They have redefined with the public bipartisanship to mean things that have bipartisan support in the country. They are the first White House to make that they have redefined bipartisanship successfully for the first time, and he used it, I thought, to the most effect tonight around the gun control debate, because he didn't just put the 85% of all Americans who support all of the things that is in their proposal, he put gun owners in it. And that's always been what I thought should have cross-pressured the NRA. It never did. He used that to great effect tonight.
Can we talk about the things that we were talking about on the background? We couldn't see a lot of what the Republicans were standing up and cheering for, but he put some things out there that would be very hard for them to say they don't like. He said, we cut child poverty. It didn't look like anybody really stood up. He said, we're going to build, you know, millions of American jobs. I don't know if they stood up, but he's presenting a platform that is so basic. It's just sort of basic jobs politics that it's going to be difficult. I do have to say that a lot of what he said, President Obama said, but because Joe Biden is Joe Biden, he's an older white guy, it comes across differently to the country, to the people who are the most triggered by people like Obama. It doesn't come across as super academic or Harvardian or whatever it is, or you know, it's not a black guy, right? So I think he has built, understand every time he speaks why Donald Trump was afraid of him, why he feared that guy being the nominee, because that is a very difficult politics to oppose.
We're about 1 minute or perhaps less out from the Republican response from South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. Any thoughts from you before we hear from him in terms of him being the choice for this response?
Look, he is now at the table negotiating police reform, which was one of the centerpieces of tonight's address.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's, from what folks that I'm talking with in South Carolina, even Democrats who know Tim Scott and who oppose him on lots of policies, do believe he is sincere and believe that he sees this as a chance to make his mark, something that he hadn't done up to now.
Brian, over to you.
And with that, the clock, by the way, started when Joe Biden exited the chamber. That is the exact 5-minute warning to the start of the response. As we've been saying, it will be Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. Let's go to that now.
Good evening. I'm Senator Tim Scott from the great state of South Carolina. We just heard President Biden's first address to Congress. Our president seems like a good man. His speech was full of good words, but President Biden promised you a specific kind of leadership. He promised to unite a nation, to lower the temperature, to govern for all Americans, no matter how we voted. This was the pitch. You just heard it again. But our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. We need policies and progress that brings us closer together. But 3 months in, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further apart. I won't waste your time with finger pointing or partisan bickering. You can get that on TV anytime you want. I want to have an honest conversation about common sense and common ground, about this feeling that our nation is sliding off its shared foundation and how we move forward together. Growing up, I never dreamed I would be standing here tonight. When I was a kid, my parents divorced. My mother, my brother, and I moved in with my grandparents. 3 of us sharing 1 bedroom. I was disillusioned and angry, and I nearly failed out of school. But I was blessed. First, with a praying mama. And let me say this to the single mothers out there who are working their tails off, working hard, trying to make the ends meet, wondering if it's worth it. You can bet it is. God bless your amazing effort on the part of your kids. I was also blessed by a Chick-fil-A operator, John Moniz, and finally with a string of opportunities that are only possible here in America. This past year, I've watched COVID attack every rung of the ladder that helped me up. So many families have lost parents and grandparents too early. So many small businesses have gone under. Becoming a Christian transformed my life, but for months, too many churches were shut down. Most of all, I'm saddened that millions of kids have lost a year of learning when they could not afford to lose a single day. Locking vulnerable kids out of the classroom is locking adults out of their future. Our public schools should have reopened months ago. Other countries did. Private and religious schools did. Science has shown for months that schools are safe. But too often, powerful grown-ups set science aside, and kids like me were left behind. The clearest case I've seen for school choice in our lifetimes, because we know that education is the closest thing to magic in America. Last year, under Republican leadership, we passed 5 bipartisan COVID packages. Congress supported our schools, our hospitals, saved our economy, and funded Operation Warp Speed, delivering vaccines in record time. All 5 bills got 90 votes in the Senate. Common sense found common ground. In February, Republicans told President Biden we wanted to keep working together to finish this fight. But Democrats wanted to go it alone. They spent almost $2 trillion on a partisan bill that the White House bragged was the most liberal bill in American history. Only 1% went to vaccinations, no requirement to reopen schools promptly. COVID brought Congress together 5 times. this administration pushed us apart. Another issue that should unite us is infrastructure. Republicans support everything you think of when you think of infrastructure. Roads, bridges, ports, airports, waterways, high-speed broadband. We're in for all of that. But again, Democrats want a partisan wish list. They won't even build bridges to build bridges. Less than 6% of the president's plan goes to roads and bridges. It's a liberal wish list of big government waste, plus the biggest job-killing tax hikes in a generation. Experts say when all is said and done, it would lower wages of the average American worker and shrink our economy. Tonight, we also heard about a so-called family plan, even more taxing, even more spending, to put Washington even more in the middle of your life, from the cradle to college. The beauty of the American dream is that families get to define it for themselves. We should be expanding opportunities and options for all families, not throwing money at certain issues because Democrats think they know best. Infrastructure spending that shrinks our economy is not common sense. Weakening our southern borders and creating a crisis is not compassionate. The president is also abandoning principles he's held for decades. Now he says your tax dollars should fund abortions. He's laying groundwork to pack the Supreme Court. This is not common ground. Nowhere do we need common ground more desperately than in our discussions of race. I have experienced the pain of discrimination. I know what it feels like to be pulled over for no reason, to be followed around the store while I'm shopping. I remember every morning at the kitchen table, my grandfather would open the newspaper and read it, I thought. But later I realized he had never learned to read it. He just wanted to set the right example. I've also experienced a different kind of intolerance. I get called Uncle Tom and the N-word by progressives, by liberals. Just last week, a national newspaper suggested my family's poverty was actually privilege because a relative owned land generations before my time. Believe me, I know firsthand our healing is not finished. In 2015, after the shooting of Walter Scott, I wrote a bill to fund body cameras. Last year, after the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I built an even bigger police reform proposal. But my Democratic colleagues blocked it. I extended an olive branch. I offered amendments, but Democrats used a filibuster to block the debate from even happening. My friends across the aisle seemed to want the issue more than they wanted a solution. But I'm still working. I'm hopeful that this will be different. When America comes together, we've made tremendous progress, but powerful forces want to pull us apart. 100 years ago, kids in classrooms were taught the color of their skin was their most important characteristic. And if they looked a certain way, they were inferior. Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. From colleges to corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all, by doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country. It's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination, and it's wrong to try to use our painful past to dishonestly shut down debates in the present. I'm an African American who's voted in the South my entire life. I take voting rights personally. Republicans support making it easier to vote and harder to cheat, and so do the voters. Big majorities of Americans support early voting, and big majorities support voter ID, including African Americans and Hispanics. Common sense makes common ground. But today, this conversation has collapsed. The state of Georgia passed a law that expands early voting, preserves no excuse mail-in voting, and despite what the president claimed, did not reduce election day hours. If you actually read this law, it's mainstream. It will be easier to vote early in Georgia than in Democrat-run New York. But the left doesn't want you to know that. They want people virtue signaling by yelling about a law they haven't even read. Fact checkers have called out the White House for misstatements. The president absurdly claims that this is worse than Jim Crow. What is going on here? I'll tell you, a Washington power grab. This misplaced outrage is supposed to justify Democrats' new sweeping bill that would take over elections for all 50 states. It would send public funds to political campaigns you disagree with and make the bipartisan Federal Elections Commission partisan. This is not about civil rights or our racial past. It's about rigging elections in the future. And no, the same filibuster that President Obama and President Biden praised when they were senators, the same filibuster that the Democrats used to kill my police reform bill last year, has not suddenly become a racist relic just because the shoe is now on the other foot. Race is not a political weapon to settle every issue the way one side wants. It's far too important. This should be a joyful springtime for our nation. This administration inherited a tide that had already turned. The coronavirus is on the run. Thanks to Operation Warp Speed and the Trump administration, our country is flooded with safe and effective vaccines. Thanks to our bipartisan work last year, job openings are rebounding. So why do we feel so divided? Anxious. A nation with so much cause for hope should not feel so heavy laden. A president who promised to bring us together should not be pushing agendas that tear us apart. The American family deserves better, and we know what better looks like. Just before COVID, we had the most inclusive economy in my lifetime, the lowest unemployment rates ever recorded for African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians, and a 70-year low nearly for women. Wages were growing faster at the bottom than at the top. The bottom 25% saw their wages go up faster than the top 25%. That happened because Republicans focused on expanding opportunity for all Americans. In addition to that, we passed opportunity zones, criminal justice reform, and permanent funding for historically Black colleges and universities for the first time ever. We fought the drug epidemic, rebuilt our military, and cut taxes for working families and single moms like the one that raised me. Our best future will not come from Washington schemes or socialist dreams. It will come from you, the American people. Black, Hispanic, white, and Asian, Republican and Democrat, brave police officers in Black neighborhoods. We are not adversaries. We are family. We are all in this together, and we get to live in the greatest country on earth. The country where my grandfather in his 94 years saw his family go from cotton to Congress in one lifetime. So I am more than hopeful. I am confident that our finest hour is yet to come. Original sin is never the end of the story, not in our souls and not for our nation. The real story is always redemption. I am standing here because my mom has prayed me through some really tough times. I believe our nation has succeeded the same way because generations of Americans in their own ways have asked for grace and God has supplied it. So I will close with a word from a worship song that really helped me through this past year of COVID. The music is new, but the words draw from Scripture. May the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you. In your weeping and your rejoicing, he is for you. May his favor be upon our nation for 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children. Good night, and God bless the United States of America.
One of the most difficult jobs in all of American politics is to follow the imputed majesty of a State of the Union address or a joint address to Congress with a response that is always delivered somewhere else, that is always staged in some way that's supposed to look different but equivalent. It's hard when it is a Democrat responding to a Republican president. It is hard when it is a Republican responding to a Democratic president. But that was Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina for the Republican Party with the response to the president's joint address to the Congress tonight. Correct me if I'm wrong here, I may be wrong, but I believe that was a longer response than we're used to getting in terms of the opposition party's response. I think that Senator Scott is incredibly talented at delivering these sort of things. I do think it's going to be hard for most people who are paying any attention to politics to swallow the Republican support making it easier to vote line and the whole line that he had, the long passage he had about how Democrats are the ones who are blocking police reform. There's some stuff there that may make sense in a sliver of Republican world, but in the news world, I don't think will ring.
Well, this is a speech delivered from a planet where facts don't matter, which is where the current Republican Party resides. So it's really not his fault, but it is his responsibility to get his facts straight. He said this, that Biden inherited a country that had already rounded the bend on COVID. 4,000 people a day were dying in January. So I don't know, again, on what planet we had rounded the bend. And Operation Warp Speed didn't do anything to get a needle into an arm. So a lot of disinformation. It felt almost scripted by someone close to the president who wanted that revision of
President
history.
Trump.
Correct. I think that the most reprehensible thing in the eyes of clear-eyed people of any party about the Georgia law, the reason Major League Baseball left isn't because it makes it easier to vote in Georgia than in Democratic-run New York, is you know, again, if you're so proud of the lie, tell the truth about it. The lie would have removed Republican Brad Raffensperger from a decision-making place. So it's just disingenuous to say that the law is so good, we're so proud of it. If it were that good, Major League Baseball wouldn't have moved the game. So it wasn't true, was, in my view, the biggest flaw.
Well, I mean, he even went back to the old pretending that Republicans and Trump saved historically black colleges. Representative Alma Adams, you know, the Futures Act, there was a Republican who co-sponsored with her. That is not Republicans saving black colleges. They keep on using that line. I was surprised, to be honest with you. This was standard Republican pabulum. This could have been delivered by Tom Cotton or Mike Lee. America's not a racist country. There's no racism here. I'm not sure what the purpose of this was. His audience, to me, appeared to be conservative, white Republicans who are angry over certain things of cancel culture and the same sort of cultural nods that we hear on Fox News. And he was out here to throw them a lifeline. It was disappointing. He had an opportunity to really speak about his work on the George Floyd Act and what he's trying to do to offer his own amendments to it. He didn't. He just came out and talked about the amendments he tried to offer before, which were seen as inadequate by mainstream people who are involved in trying to do criminal justice reform, saw his previous bill as inadequate. Yeah, it failed a cloture vote. They can't get a cloture vote on the one that's going through the Congress now. He said nothing about the work that he wants to do on this act, for which I had just given him credit before he started speaking, and for which he's getting credit from Democrats who are working with him. People see him as being genuine in trying to work on criminal justice reform. And rather than make even one single salutary point on that, he came out and lied about the Georgia bill, saying it's easier to vote in Georgia than in New York. I am shocked and a bit embarrassed for him. This was a lost opportunity. Tim Scott has an opportunity to make his mark on criminal justice reform, and this ain't going to do it. This wasn't it.
Let's bring into the conversation now our friend and colleague Lawrence O'Donnell. Lawrence, you've been watching alongside us this whole night, watching both the president's address and that response. What do you think tonight?
I just want to say one thing about the response, and that's the first sentence of it. And it's a concept that Joe Biden would never use. Tim Scott said, these were his exact words, "Our president seems like a good man." Now, he couldn't bring himself to say to Republican voters who he wants to raise money from, our president is a good man.
Yeah.
If you asked Joe Biden about Tim Scott, there's no circumstance in which Joe Biden wouldn't say, Tim Scott's a good man. And then he'd go on to talk about his disagreements. But that construction is a 21st century Republican construction in that sentence about a Democratic president of the United States. Our president seems like a good man, and then the rest of the paragraph is dismantling this fraud that was just put up there on the stage for you. So that's the 21st century Republicanism. Joe Biden's speech, Rachel, was really fascinating for me because Joe Biden, by my count, rough count, has been to about 50 addresses to the Congress by presidents, 44 State of the Union addresses as a senator, vice president, another probably half dozen special addresses to Congress by presidents at different times in crisis and other times. And now we know what Joe Biden was thinking every single time he was sitting there listening to those speeches. I want to hear more about jobs. I want to hear more about jobs. And so, I mean, this is someone who he talked about climate change in a short passage about it, and he said the most important word about climate change is jobs. He discussed this infrastructure bill, which is the most complex infrastructure bill that's ever been introduced, as it should be, because it's 21st century infrastructure, which includes elements that we didn't have in the 20th century in our infrastructure. And the name of that bill is the American Jobs Bill. The name of the infrastructure bill during the Clinton administration was the Intermodal Surface Transportation Act. So Joe Biden has been paying attention, and the simplicity of the language in every single line. I never lost my place in this speech. There was no soaring rhetoric, really, but there was heart and there was feeling. Barack Obama could deliver the most beautiful paragraphs of soaring rhetoric in speeches like this. Joe Biden didn't attempt that, but every single sentence had a very clear point to it, and every line of it had that Biden humility in it, which is a very hard thing to convey when you are president of the United States.
Well, fair point. I'm going to ask, I'm going to give the control room a second to do this, but the sound that Lawrence is talking about and eloquently describing in terms of how it landed is the third shot that we cut, the third piece of sound on tape. I'll give the control room a chance to turn that around before we go to our next break. That moment where he talked about what climate policy is jobs, and the room erupted. I want to make sure we turn that around in just a second. Lawrence, we're going to bring into the conversation, though, now Congresswoman Karen Bass of California, who has been working with Senator Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, and Senator Tim Scott, Republican of South Carolina, who we just heard on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Congresswoman Bass, it is great to see you tonight on this big night. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So talk to us a little bit about what we just heard from Senator Scott. My beloved colleague here, Joy Reid, was just expressing her disappointment that she didn't hear more substance from Senator Scott on what's possible in police reform and what he wants to do and what could happen in the future. It sounded to me like he was just saying Democrats are against policing reform. As somebody who's intimately involved with this issue, how did you hear it, and what should we know?
Well, I heard him probably speaking on behalf of his caucus and his party, but I will tell you in my conversations with him, in the meetings and discussions that we've been having, he has been very open, very inclusive, and at the end of the day says, I am a Republican, I am a conservative, but I am a black man who has experienced harassment and being pulled over and stopped by police and wants to get this on President Biden's desk. So although I didn't have the opportunity to hear all of it because I was walking over from hearing the president, what I did hear, it sounds like he was speaking the party and not the man.
In terms of the president's remarks tonight, they were emotional remarks and vivid remarks, talking about the knee on the neck of African Americans, talking about white supremacy as terrorism. The president had, in his prepared remarks, a very powerful section of writing on this topic, but he diverted from his prepared remarks to give even more emotional, even stronger remarks on the subject. Can you talk at all about the support or interaction that you have with the administration, with the executive branch in terms of trying to get this done? It seems like this is something that means a lot to both the president and vice president.
Well, the administration has been very clear. They want it done. They want it done quickly. They have been extremely accessible and helpful, and providing us information and anything that we needed to help get this across the finish line. And so I was happy to hear him talk about it because, and what a relief it was. I mean, it was an uplifting presentation. I love the way he connected climate to jobs. I think it's something that Democrats have not done enough. And the way he even talked about how the jobs that would be available, you don't necessarily need a college degree for, maybe not even a community college degree. And so to me, all of those issues are interconnected, because when you look at employment, where is the employment very high, which is in the Black and brown communities. And so he talked about racial inequity, he talked about white supremacy, just like he did in his inauguration speech. And I think for African Americans and other people of color, it's just an opportunity to exhale and to relax, especially after 4 years of somebody who spent every day of his presidency trying to foment racial division.
Congresswoman Karen Bass of California, it is such a pleasure to have you with us tonight, ma'am. Thank you for taking the time. I know it's a celebratory night and a big night tonight. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I should note, as we were talking with Congresswoman Bass, the Justice Department has just taken all of these very dramatic actions on policing, right? The pattern and practice investigation into Minneapolis, which, of course, is the George Floyd case and the Daunte Wright case, pattern and practice investigation in Louisville, a federal civil rights investigation into what happened in North Carolina with Elizabeth City, North Carolina, hate crimes charges today against 3 Georgia men in the Ahmaud Arbery killing. We've got news tonight out of Minneapolis about a potential civil rights indictment of Derek Chauvin and 3 other officers. We saw a Georgia sheriff indicted on federal civil rights charges for mistreating prisoners in his care. I mean, that's all happened in the week. I don't want to put this all on her. That's all happened in the week since Lisa Monaco has been installed as as the Deputy Attorney General, the #2 official at the Justice Department. Having that kind of energy from the Justice Department alongside this legislative effort for police reform, boy, does it feel like a different world.
I mean, and then again, I don't mean to pick on Tim Scott. I'm sorry to pick on him, but that is why this is a gimme. This is easy. Convicting Derek Chauvin, that wasn't hard. That was the most open and shut case of police brutality probably in the history of the United States. They had 10 police officers testify against him, including the chief. That was not a difficult thing. You know, it wasn't a difficult decision to come to. Policing reform, at this point, police need credibility in order to do their jobs. You cannot police a community that doesn't trust you, that won't talk to you, that sees you as an invading army. There's an opportunity here. I would urge people like Tim Scott to lean into that.
But, you know, I think what Karen Bass just alluded to was that she heard Tim Scott totally different than we did. She heard him speaking on behalf of his caucus, and his caucus may very well be exactly where he communicated from tonight, with that sort of real narrow understanding of what happened in Georgia that was so bad that Major League Baseball moved their game. What I heard her say when she said he was speaking for his caucus made me think that maybe she's seeing a very earnest and open person.
Because that's all I've heard behind the scenes. All I've heard behind the scenes is that he's honestly negotiating. So you're right. Maybe he was speaking what Mike Lee and Tom Cotton, et cetera, wanted to hear.
Hint that he is.
Let's bring into the conversation our beloved colleague, Chris Hayes, the host of MSNBC's All In, who has been working his thumbs overtime, tweeting throughout the night. So I know a little bit about what you think you saw this evening, Chris. What is your takeaway from these speeches?
I find the Joe Biden presidency pretty fascinating and in some ways unexpected in surprising ways. I mean, It is, you know, there's Benjamin Disraeli, the British politician, wrote a novel in which he coined this phrase, Tory men and Whig measures, by which he meant conservative politicians pursuing essentially liberal reformist aims. That was the sweet spot, right? The Tory men and Whig measures that people wouldn't be scared off. You had Tory men, you had sort of good, you know, tried and true conservatives actually doing reformist liberal things. And I feel like that's been a little bit of the Joe Biden approach here. Here's Joe Biden, 40 years in the spotlight. 40 years, it's a center of the Democratic caucus, someone who was, you know, voted for the Iraq War and was on the side of bankruptcy reform and these things. He's never been a radical. He's never been a socialist. As he said, I beat the socialist. Trying to essentially push through a kind of social democratic agenda in America that is very popular and has been defeated in the past by a lot of sort of culture war wedge issues. And so I just find it very effective. I mean, they're picking things that are good substantively, that Biden clearly believes in, that the Democratic coalition is behind, and things that are polling at 60, 65%. If you say to America, what do you think about getting rid of all the lead pipes in America? How's that poll? Should we not run the risk of brain poisoning our children and loved ones? Let's do it, right? And then you see, counter to that in Tim Scott, the just utter ideological exhaustion of conservatism in this moment. I mean, there was a time when conservatives would have licked their chops at the sheer scope of the agenda that Biden is proposing in these two packages coming off COVID relief. And Scott spent a few minutes on it, and he threw some tax and spend and socialism, and then he got into the things conservatives care about, which is like the culture and what they're teaching you in school about American racism, and restricting voting, which is where all the action is, which is what the base cares about, because there's no substantive ideological agenda about the big questions of political economy in American life anymore. There's none. There's nothing there. They don't have arguments on the other side anymore. They forgot how to make them.
The post-policy era in Republican Party politics. Chris, I'm going to let you go now because I know you are coming back live for an hour at midnight Eastern time, so we're going to let you go to get prepping for that. In the meantime, we're going to bring in New York Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who is a member of Nancy Pelosi's leadership team in the House. Congressman Jeffries, we really appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you.
We've seen the response from Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina, his response to the president's address tonight. The president's address just over an hour, laying out his very ambitious agenda. What do you think is the most important thing people should take away from these speeches tonight?
Well, that Joe Biden recognizes that we have big problems in America. It's a big moment for this country, and it requires big solutions. And Joe Biden is not running away from the big solutions that are necessary. He's running toward them and laying them out in a very clear and simple yet compelling fashion, both as it relates to what we have already done, the American Rescue Plan, as well as what is necessary in terms of how we're going to move forward, the American Jobs Plan in terms of infrastructure, broadly defined, and of course the American Families Plan.
In terms of the relationship between the two parties, this chief critique that we saw from Senator Scott tonight, and that I think is the chief critique from the Republicans, although I wouldn't put words in their mouth, has been that they themselves do not support his legislative agenda. They themselves do not support COVID relief. They themselves do not support the things he's doing, and therefore those things are not good because they are not bipartisan endeavors. What is your response to that? Because they believe that the American public wants to see both parties working together to pass things to improve conditions in the country.
I think the American people definitely would prefer to see Democrats and Republicans working together whenever and wherever possible. And that's exactly what Joe Biden has been trying to do and will continue to try to do. And he expressed that very clearly during his remarks tonight. But the Republican Party has lapsed into a very familiar playbook, which always occurs when they have a Democratic president. That's obstruction today, obstruction tomorrow, obstruction forever, and try to prevent and deny the Democratic president from solving challenges on behalf of the American people. But with Joe Biden, it's just not working because the things that he has proposed are broadly supported by the American people. And I also think, Rachel, that the way that he laid things out today and then Tim Scott's response shows the differences between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans tried to convince the American people that we are competing against each other as part of the effort to divide us. Joe Biden made it clear that we're in this together if we're competing with anyone, it's the rest of the world, particularly the autocrats who think that democracy is about to sunset. And so he rallied the American people together, both in terms of the principles of American exceptionalism, but also by leaning into the challenges of working families, the middle class, those who aspire to be part of the middle class here in America.